Hello everyone. So we start our next practice. So this one is on classification, and the goal is to understand what are the variables that determine the price of a health insurance. So let's start by reading the data. So the first thing is to clear all variables that we have here in at the MATLAB. So next we will load the data, and as always we should get acquainted with it. So let's open the table. So we have 1300 rows. So these are individuals, and for each individual we annotate what is his or her age, sex, body mass index, and the number of children they have, whether they smoke or not, the region where they are based, and then the charges in dollars that they pay per year. And finally, this is the variable that we want to predict whether these charges are in the upper quarter of the distribution of charges. Okay, so let's look at this. So here we have a number of summaries. So let's see what we have. So we have, for instance, here some values. So we have for each variable, we have what are the minimum, maximum, and the median. So we see that the age is limited in this data set between 18 and 64 years. So this is mostly the working age of the of workers. So number of number of individuals according to sex. So we see it is a pretty balanced data set. Then body mass index. The body mass index goes from almost 16 to a maximum of 53. The median is 30. The body mass index is a value that tells you how is the relationship between your weight and your height. So for normal people, it should be somewhere between 18.5 and 25. And if you are below, you are too thin. And if you are above 25, you are obese. And then number of children goes from 0 to 5. The median is 1. The smoking state, most people don't smoke and doesn't smoke, and then a few of them, not a few, but something like 20% of them, they smoke. And the regions these are regions in the US. So these are the 4 regions. They are pretty balanced. And then charges. So what is the cost of the health insurance between for a year? So it goes from 1,000 to 64,000, and the median, the most not the most typical, but the value at which 50% of the data is below this value is 9,000. And then whether you are in the upper quarter of this distribution of charges or not is this one. So this is exactly 25%. Then we can compare what are the variables, what are the relationships between variables. So we can see, for instance, that sex. So what is the relationship between sex and upper quarter? So we construct the contingency table, and in this contingency table we can compute whether whether the two variables are independent from each other. We do that through a chi-squared test. So the p-value of that test is 1.5%. So this is low, and we think that there is a relationship between the two. So being in the upper quarter is not independent of being male or female. Then whether being a smoker or not makes you being in the upper quarter. and this has an extremely low p-value, so there is a very important relationship between the two. And then the region, it also seems that there is a dependence on the region. We can see this information graphically. So here we have the distribution of sex. So being male seems to be a little bit more likely to make you in the upper half, in the upper quarter. Then being a smoker, you see, it completely reverses the pattern. So if you are a smoker, then the probability of not being in the upper quarter is really low. So here, blue means not being in the upper quarter, orange being in the upper quarter. And so if you smoke, you are very likely to belong to the upper quarter. And if you don't smoke, then you also have a non-negligible probability, but much smaller than for smokers. And then the regions, it seems that southeast has a larger probability of being in the upper quarter, and southwest is the one with the lowest probability. Okay, so let's see next graphs. So next graphs are what is the distribution of age, body mass index, and number of children with a state of upper quarter. So we can see that the age is different, the median is different in the two groups. We don't see any particular pattern. Maybe the box is a little bit larger here, the body mass index, but it seems that the distribution is not totally different in both. And then number of children, we don't observe a difference at all. It might be interesting also to plot what is the histogram of the charges. So this is the histogram, and as always, when there are large variations of one variable, it is more convenient to plot the logarithm of that variable. Let's plot the logarithm. This is a typical variable that is log normal. So log normal means the logarithm looks like normal. This is a very loose statement that this distribution is normal. We should make a test to be able to state that, but it looks more or less. Okay, so here we see the most typical value is around 10 to the 4, but the price goes from 10 to the 3 to 10 to the 5 almost. Okay, good. So now we know how the data looks like. So let's start by constructing a classification tree with all the variables. So here we are fitting a classification tree on this data, and then the upper quarter, we want to explain the upper quarter as a function of all these variables. Then the split criterion to decide whether to split a node or not is the deviance, and the mean size of your parent to be splitted has to be at least 10. Okay, so then we will plot the tree, and we will plot the confusion matrix. Okay, so let's run this section. So we can see that the confusion matrix makes very few mistakes. Here we have not played around with all this training and test data. In the practice we will do, but in principle you know that we should split data into two parts, as like something like 80% for the training, 20% for the test, just to make sure that the model makes sense. But here in this example we are just concentrating on the fitting process, and then on the next practice we will also look at the validation of that fitting. And then we see that the tree looks something complicated. So we see, for instance, that the first question is whether you're a smoker or not. Then if you don't smoke, then if your body mass index is smaller than something, and then if your body mass index is smaller than 22, then we check whether your body mass index is smaller than 18. If it is larger than 18, you are more likely not to belong to the upper quarter quarter. And then if your body mass index is really if it is lower than 18.6, then you don't belong to the upper quarter. But if your body mass index is between 18.65 and 18.81 and you don't smoke, then you're more likely to belong to the upper quarter. So this sounds a bit like overfitting. So actually you can prune your overfitting because it is a very narrow condition, and then you could prune your tree. So the most relevant part of the tree, we see that it is not this one, it is not the last one disappearing. So the last one disappearing are here. So the most relevant part seems to be related to smoker state, then body mass index and age. We will confirm that later in more detailed analysis of this dataset. But this seems to be the most stable part of the tree. Okay, so the confusion matrix, we have already seen that most of the data, we would like these two error cells to be 0, but they are not 0, but they are small. So it is only 0.8% of the data and 3.1% of the data. So not so much. But this gives us a kind of lower bound of what we can achieve. Okay, so now instead of taking all variables at the same time, we will try to identify which are the important variables, and for doing that, we will take variables one by one. So we want to explain, we want to construct a tree of the upper quarter as a function of sex. So we run the section. So we see that we cannot classify, so the tree is not able to tell that any one of the input points is belongs to the upper quarter, and all of the upper quarter individuals are classified as non-belonging to the upper quarter, so they are all errors, and our error rate, total error rate, is 25%, and this is the tree. So there is actually no condition. You are immediately classified as false, and this makes sense because false is the most common label. So if you want to construct a very simple tree, then that tree, a tree that simply tells you, predicts that any input data without looking at the variables is false, doesn't belong to the upper quarter, it has a success rate of 75%, which is relatively high. Okay, so we cannot construct useful trees with sex. So let's see with number of children. So with number of children, we see the same. So the algorithm is not able to construct a useful tree with the number of children. So let's see with the region. So with the region, it is exactly the same. So let's go now for more complex trees where we combine these three variables, sex, children, and region. It might be that it cannot construct useful trees based on each variable alone, but then it finds combination of them that construct useful trees. So let's see, but this is not the case in this example. Okay, so it seems that because we saw that the variables are not independent, but they are not so much correlated so that they can be usefully used in a classification tree. Okay, so let's go now for another variable. So let's go now for a smoker. So for a smoker, now we have already a very good tree. So you may remind that our lower bound had something here like 0.1 and 3 point something here. We have already 6 and 1.5. So relatively low values. Our accuracy of classification is 92%. So really good. And so the main message would be, if you smoke, you have you have a high probability of being assigned uh, to the upper quarter part of the charge distribution. Then what about the body mass index? So the body mass index give us a much lower classification success. So that means that it is not so determinant in the to say whether you belong to the to the upper quarter or not. So as we see, the most basic tree is just predicting false, and if we want to go one step forward, then we have a relatively complicated tree. So all the questions are on body mass index, because we know that body mass index it is the only variable we have used to predict the upper quarter state. And then here what we have also is kind of overfitting. You can imagine that these are relatively complex questions, and so it seems to be looking at very narrow conditions. So probably that is an indicator of overfitting. We are not validating that within this practice. We will do next in next class. And then here, for instance, here we can see that there is a distinction. This distinction we cannot see it well, so we can enlarge the tree, and then we can look at that area to see whether we can identify better what is the condition. So the condition seems to be, if your body mass index is larger than 22.5, smaller than 34, remind that the limit of obesity is 30. So if you are between 22.5 and 34, and then you are between 20.5 and 23, or 22.84 and 23. So you can imagine that the people falling in this bucket of the data is relatively few. So this really sounds like overfitting. Okay, so and the error rate has not decreased so much. Okay, so let's do it now with age. So let's see if we can construct useful trees with age. So it seems that the age is not so much related. So within the working age, doesn't seem that there is a very strong relationship between age and the state of being in the upper quarter of the health insurance. And we see now that the tree doesn't look too much overfitted, and that typically the true values are here. So 42 ages, 42 years old seems to be the limit, whether you are more likely to be in the upper quarter part. But otherwise, all the rest of people is not. Okay, so then we have we already know that the most important variables are smoker and body mass index. Let's see if we can construct a tree using only those two. Okay, so let's run the section. The classification success of smoking alone was 92.5. Now we have increased it a bit, mostly by reducing the number of false positives. So these are false positives, these are false negatives. These are false positives because the tree predicts true, so that is positive, but it is false. So the actual state is not belonging to the upper class, to the upper quarter. And then this is a false negative because the tree predicts no, but the true state is yes. Okay, so now again it looks like complicated. So complicated normally is an indication of overfitting. And then the most simplified tree is if you don't smoke, you are not classified as upper quarter. If you smoke, you are classified as upper quarter. Then we can increase it a bit, and then this subgroup we can study it a little bit further using the body mass index. So this is the main message. We can subdivide this group for which you smoke, you're immediately classified by the previous tree as belonging to the upper quarter. But then if you refine it a bit with the body mass index, you can have a little better classification power. Not too much better, because the full tree achieves only an improvement of 1.5, but by adding this body mass index refinement, you can get a little bit better. Okay, so let's see now if we can do it even better. So let's add smoker, body mass index, and age, and then let's see. Here we have it gone even a little bit further, from 94 to 96, but this 96 is for the full tree, that we know that very likely it is doing overfitting. So if we want to refine, then this subgroup is refined using both body mass index and age. And this is not a too complex tree, so we can try to interpret it. So if you smoke, let's look at this one. So if you smoke but you are not heavy and you are young, then it is most likely that you are classified as not belonging to the upper quarter. So still, even if you smoke, which is bad for your health, but it is not so bad. It is always bad, so don't misunderstand me. But you are not in the upper quarter. And otherwise, if you smoke and you are not thin, or you are not young, then very likely you are in the upper quarter. Okay, so let's see how the loss function. The loss function, just a reminder, is this deviance. How the loss function behaves as a function of the different subtrees. So when we subdivide it into more and more pieces, how much deviance we are gaining. So this is what we have here. So the first subdivision is really useful. So this first subdivision corresponds to this subdivision, in which we go from false, a very simple tree, to one that includes a smoking state. And then if we now increase it a bit, so just we are gaining this deviance, Then the next deviation, the next subdivision is not adding too much because we see it is a little bit flat. Then next subdivision here, which is a very long subdivision, it brings you a bit more, and so on. This is the way to analyze this data. But always keep in mind that if you don't have a validation step in which you can look at what is the validity of your trees, then probably you are doing overfitting. So based on this plot that I have already closed, so based on that plot, we can decide, okay, so let's go to 4. So let's do a pruning at point 4. We can do that through the graphical user interface or by or programmatically by saying, okay, take the previous tree and then prune it at level 4, and then we see the matrix where we see the tree and the confusion matrix. So let's see that, and here it goes down from 96 to 94.2, and still it looks like a relatively complicated tree with probably overfitting. Let's try to prune it further, and if we prune it further, we have a relatively simple tree that makes us be more confident that we are not doing overfitting. But then the classification success only grows by 0.8. It grows from 92.5 to 93.3. So not so much increase. So we know that this part is not adding really a lot to the quality of our classifier. So that would be all, and see you in class.